right, everybody. Thank you all for joining us and welcome to SAGAC's annual general meeting for 2022. My name is Kaylee Meyer. For those of you who haven't seen me before or just need a bit of a refresher, I'm Renee and Charlie Frank's granddaughter. I'm also the newest board member in SAGAC, and I'm very excited to take on the new challenges that come with that. One of the biggest things that I hope to address is growing the organization, specifically bringing in new, younger members. This year, Corona willing, we hope to put together some events or activities that are catered towards the younger crowd. So keep an eye out for that and be sure to let your neighbors, grandchildren, children know that that's coming their way. That being said, before we get to the logistics of today's meeting, we have a special guest with us here on Zoom, all the way from South Africa, bright and early in the morning. Bev Goldman is the president of the Union of Jewish Women South Africa, a national organization that celebrated 90 years last year. She's also a member of the International Council of Jewish Women and has served in multiple positions over the years in organizations focused on Israel, South Africa, and Judaism in her community. In addition to all that, she holds an MA in feminist literature, and most importantly, is a grandmother of 12 and great-grandmother of 3. I'll let her tell you all about the Union of Jewish Women South Africa, but something that I wanted to emphasize is that the work that they do benefits those of all religious and racial groups in the country, whether through feeding schemes, empowerment projects, education, or fighting for women's rights. A few things that I do want to note. This webinar is being recorded, and we will have some time at the end for questions and answers after Bev's presentation. So please be sure to write your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And last but not least, there will be a raffle at the end of the presentation. So stay tuned. There's a beautiful piece of artwork that will be raffled off. So without further ado, I give you all Bev Goldman.
Thank you very much, Kaylee, for that lovely introduction, and good evening, or rather good very early morning from Johannesburg to everyone. It's lovely to be with you here, and thank you for inviting me to address your AGM. For that, I have to thank my fabulous cousin, Jean Galis, who decided that sharing the story of the South African Jews with ex-South Africans in San Diego and elsewhere in the US would be interesting and valuable, and could even encourage those of you who have not yet registered to watch this incredible series to do just that. Excuse me. I'm sure, like other expats across the globe, you still have memories, hopefully warm memories, of this country whose Jewish population has probably experienced more upheaval, uncertainty, and insecurity than many other diaspora communities, but which has also been a haven and a most encouraging starting block for so many, giving them the tools either to become successful in their homeland or take their upbringing, their history, their accomplishments, and their achievements elsewhere in the world and promote South Africa's standing, especially in the fields of medicine, science, and business. I'm a very proud South African, and I love this country. There's much in it that distresses me: the corruption, the crime, the poverty, the appalling education system, the government stroke ANC's intractable and appallingly vitriolic attitude towards Israel, but its equally hostile attitude towards anti-Semitism, ensuring that the Jewish community is respected and protected. But South Africa is in my blood, as it is in the blood of so many of us who remain here, in spite of the dismal and often disconcerting situation comforting us. When I see how civil society, notably the women's organizations of all creeds and colors, and especially the Union of Jewish Women of South Africa, strives to make a difference to so many needy lives and struggles to give dignity not only to those experiencing poverty, but those who are victims of domestic abuse, child trafficking, paucity of educational resources, loneliness, homelessness, and a myriad of other situations over which they have no control. And then when I see the smiles and warmth and resilience of so many of them and the genuine friendships, then staying here, to me anyway, makes perfect sense. I assume that, of course, most of you here tonight started life in South Africa, and many of you left because of the turbulence and the disquiet and the murky future. Yet our roots go deep, and it's hard to distance ourselves from or completely forget our origins and the beauty of the country and the challenges its people face are realities which cannot be ignored. So I'm delighted to be able to share with you the story of Legends and Legacies. Mark Wade produced the series, and as he told me, the project started when he began researching his wife's father and his family, Sephardic Jews originally from Spain, who were forced into exile during the Spanish Inquisition in the 15th century and ended up in Turkey and Greece, then forced into exile once again during the Nazi invasion of Rhodes Island, Rhodos, during World War II. As the borders into South Africa were closed to Jews at that time, they settled in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and moved to South Africa in the late 1960s. This led him to investigating the general history of South African Jewry, and although there were already countless books on the subject, he realized that a TV series was necessary to produce a comprehensive documentary on their history and contribution, probably the last opportunity to produce such a series. He had at that time been running a weekly radio program on the local Chai FM Jewish radio station. And when the new idea gained traction in his mind, he approached Alan Swirler, stage, television, and film actor, radio presenter, director, and theatre reviewer, to work with him. Alan is one of South Africa's most highly regarded theatre directors and has a string of award-winning productions to his name, including, but not limited to, The Mousetrap, The History Boys, Mass Appeal, Tuesdays with Maury, which was absolutely delightful, Travels with My Aunt, which was even better, and Hard Love. Alan showed immediate interest and came on board as the researcher and writer, and eventually the on-camera presenter. Once Mark had raised the funding for this project and the research and writing was completed, he and Alan ventured on a road trip from Cape Town to Pretoria, visiting communities, interviewing people, and seeing the cemeteries, schools, and shuls of many small towns and villages. They started the series on the beautiful beaches of Noordhoek, the Jewish Museum, and Tikvat Israel Synagogue in Cape Town. Then they ventured through the Karoo to Kimberley and then on to Johannesburg and Pretoria. They visited numerous places of Jewish interest. They interviewed a treasure trove of young, middle-aged, and older community members. They spoke to many who were not of the community, but who had had strong connections with it over the years, recognizing and acknowledging how much the Jewish community had contributed to the South African landscape. Alan shared with me some of his personal recollections around researching the documentary series. That allowed him to piece together gaps in his own personal family history, particularly when he filmed in Kimberley, where his mother was born. It was for him, he said, very meaningful to see the names of relatives on various plaques and boards of the Kimberley shul, which his mother and his sister had attended. He mentioned that one of the most moving moments was when they were filming in Graaf-Reinet. The cast was in the Jewish cemetery, and while the cameras were being set up, Alan was looking at the gravestones. A small group of stones caught his attention, all children, all very young, and when he saw the dates of their deaths, he realized that they were all victims of the dreadful 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. This was a few months before COVID hit, and the memory for him has gained even more poignancy and significance. He also spoke about filming in Oudtshoorn at the last Jewish-owned ostrich farm. The ostrich feather boom was almost entirely a Jewish entrepreneur, and Oudtshoorn was known for a while as the Jerusalem of the South. It was there that he interviewed Ryan Lipschitz, who had inherited the farm and its, quote, feather palace. Ryan begged to be interviewed in Afrikaans, as it was the language he felt most comfortable in speaking. Here he was, a living example of the Boere Jood, the immigrants who settled and assimilated into the small country communities and learned Afrikaans as their second language after Yiddish. Soon after the series was conceived and the filming began, Mark offered me, in my position as president of the Union of Jewish Women South Africa, the opportunity to be the chosen NGO which would receive a percentage of the income from the projects. As well as funding given to him by the Nati Kirsch Foundation, money would be raised by those who registered and paid for the privilege of watching this fabulous 8-part series. The decision to include the Union of Jewish Women as patron patron and recipient, was a generous and wise one, and we and those who cared for benefited from the largesse. It was a wonderful gesture on the part of the Legends and Legacies team to this Jewish NGO, which is the only one in South Africa whose mandate is to serve the needs of both the Jewish and the outreach communities, something we have done with pride and dedication for 90 years. 2021 was our 90th anniversary, and we know we've made a huge difference to many thousands of our South African fellow citizens. Let's go through some of the history as per the investigations done by Mark and Alan. Legends and Legacies is the most comprehensive account of the South African Jewish community ever attempted on screen, explaining how the community came to be and how it found a home in the foot of Africa, the Dark Continent. Jewish immigrants and their descendants have left their mark on South Africa in many ways. There have been doctors and lawyers, rabbis and parliamentarians, hawkers and diamond diggers, industrialists and landlords, renegade Boer War commandos and Nobel Peace Prize winners, social workers, activists, and artists. All of these are part of the rich complexity of Jewish life at the southern tip of Africa. The series is the proud story of the achievements, aspirations, setbacks, and recoveries as told by South African Jewish leaders of industry and science, religion and art, who are the last of a dwindling community, and the producers have now had inquiries to produce similar series on South Africa's Lebanese and Greek communities, which really says a lot for their competence. A Jewish presence in South Africa can be traced back as far as Fernão Martins, a converso, a Portuguese Jew who was forced to convert to Christianity, who was selected by Vasco da Gama to be his translator on his first voyage to Southern Africa and via Southern Africa to India in 1497. However, the first documented Jew who landed in Table Bay was Siegfried Frenkel, a ship surgeon who arrived on board a British vessel and then decided to stay in the new settlement. He became a significant figure in the formation of the small Jewish community. Then came the first Jewish immigrants from either English or Germanic backgrounds, known as the Anglo-Germans. The 1820 settlers included a number of Jewish families, in particular Benjamin Norden and his brother. Benjamin would become one of the pivotal figures in the formation of the early Jewish communities, first in Grahamstown and then in Cape Town. Benjamin Norden's cousin Nathaniel Isaacs was, like many of these early Jewish settlers, an adventurer, one who went into the interior of the country to trade in ivory and animal skins. Although there were already a few Europeans in South Africa, they were moving slowly into the interior and were often the first white people seen by South Africa's indigenous people. They were also certainly the first Jews, and one wonders how fascinating those who were Orthodox were to the tribal Africans. There was no doubt much staring, gawping, and Googling at them. The story of the South African Jewish community had three significant waves of immigration. The first is the early to middle 19th century, that of the Anglo-Germans. The second was the arrival of the Eastern European, generally referred to as the Litvaks, even though they also came from other countries such as Hungary, Romania, Belarus, and Poland. It was because the United States and South Africa initially, note well, had open door policies that the two countries became favored destinations, and this was towards the end of the 19th century. The third wave of immigration into South Africa was that of the Yekkers, the refugees from Nazi Germany. In the same way that the new arrivals in the United States headed for the Lower East Side in New York City, the Litvaks headed for District 6, which was then a multi-ethnic working class area of Cape Town, and where there were already many Jewish boarding houses. They would later move on to find landslides, or relatives who had preceded them in the small villages and towns of the interior. True to form, conflict arose between the Anglo-Germans and the Litvaks. In true Jewish tradition, we are often our own worst enemies and our own sources of dissent, dispute, and discord. The middle class of refined, as they characterized themselves, Anglo-Germans, regarded the Litvaks as working class and grob. I hate that word, but that's exactly how they describe themselves, described the Litvaks, and thus the distinct division between the two classes was born. But the Litvaks were a strong and determined bunch. I'm descended from one of them, as I'm sure some of you are, and soon most of them moved on to the center of diamond mining in Kimberley and later gold mining on the Witwatersrand. At this time, there were two new republics in South Africa, the self-governing Afrikaner Boer colonies of the South African Republic, the Transvaal, and the Orange Free State. For the most part, the citizens of these two republics lived peaceably with their British neighbors until 1867, when the discovery of diamonds and gold in the region made conflict between the Boer states and Britain inevitable. Hostilities grew, and in October 1899, the Boers delivered an ultimatum to Britain, who ruled the remaining South African colonies of the Cape and Natal, to desist from expanding her forces in the region. The Boers had in the meantime refused to grant political rights to non-Boer settlers, known as Uitlanders, and most of whom were British, or to grant civil rights to the African people of South Africa. Inevitably, this led to the outbreak of war between Britain and the two self-governing Afrikaner Boer colonies. But the war was about more than that. It was also about control over the gold mines of the Transvaal, when the international financial system and the stability of the British pound were based on the gold standard. And even more so, it was about Britain's control of South Africa and therefore a necessary contribution to its desired status of, and I quote, great power. And as we know, Britain won. By 1902, the British had crushed the Boer resistance, and on May the 31st of that year, the Peace of Vereeniging was signed, ending hostilities and heralding the unification of the four colonies of South Africa, the Cape Colony, Natal, the Free State, and the Transvaal. Unfortunately, it was at this time that rising anti-Semitism began to manifest in the Union's parliament, finding expression in a series of bills to limit immigration of the Jews from Eastern Europe. It became progressively harder for Jewish immigrants to enter the country, until by the end of the 30s, it became nearly impossible, even though a group of Jewish businessmen chartered a ship, the Stuttgart, to bring Jewish refugees from Hitler's Germany to South Africa. After the Second World War, in which many Jewish South Africans served with distinction, immigration was still throttled. Despite the fact that the Jewish community had signed up to aid the war effort in disproportionate numbers to the size of the community, Prime Minister Smuts was facing a rising tide of Afrikaner nationalism, and a great deal of anti-Semitism from that sector of the South African society. By maintaining the restrictions on immigration and Jewish immigration in particular, Smuts chose to mollify the members of his own party, who then threatened to ally with the Afrikaner nationalists and break away. We then jump ahead to 1948, when the State of Israel was declared, and Smuts regrettably lost the general election to the Afrikaner nationalists. Both events were hugely significant to the Jewish community. Again, a disproportionate number in comparison to other Jewish diaspora communities signed up to serve in Machal in Israel, and the South African Jewish community was hugely involved in the formation of the Israeli Air Force in particular and the medical field. A brief note on Machal, if I may. During the War of Independence, some 3,500 volunteers from 37 different countries rallied to Israel's defense. These young men and women, Jews as well as non-Jews, were known as Machal, Mitnadvei Chutz La'aretz, the Hebrew acronym for overseas volunteers. Many of the Machalniks, many South African ones, stayed on to live their lives in Israel. Moving on to the 50s, a complex relationship between the Jewish community and the Afrikaner nationalists began to develop. As the government began to consolidate the policies of grand apartheid, many in the community were fearful that, quote, the Jews would be next, and prevailed on the representative South African Jewish Board of Deputies not to, quote again, make waves or rock the boat. However, a significant portion of the community was equally involved in supporting the struggle against apartheid. Among them, well-known people such as Helen Sussman, Ruth First, Joe Slovo, Arthur Chaskelsen, Dennis Goldberg, Nadine Gordimer, Helen Joseph, Olga Kirsch, Harry Schwartz, Albie Sachs, Benjamin Pogrund, Harold Walpe, many, many more, but of course too many to list. In the early 60s, the Sharpeville massacre and the Cato Manor uprising seemed to foreshadow a coming civil war. All the white activists arrested in the Ronia trial were Jewish, and the community was fearful of a backlash, which resulted in the first Jewish emigration from South Africa following its wake. The second exodus happened after the Soweto student uprising of 1976, and the third, surprisingly and perhaps even unexpectedly, transpired after the coming of democracy in 1994. So there we have 3 in and 3 out. Our Jewish community, which once totaled about 130,000 at its height, is currently facing a new immigration, and it is estimated that by 2022, there will be no more than 45,000 or 50,000 Jews left in South Africa. Despite this, radical anti-Zionists in the country remain convinced that there were, and still are, more than 1 million Jews here, running business, banking, and education, and they wonder how so few could be so influential. Throughout the entire history here, however, the impact on South Africa by this small, proud community has been huge, whether in the fields of commerce, politics, academia, and the sciences, the arts, industry, and social welfare, and it has played a significant role in the history and shaping of this country. South African Jews in the field of academics have been and still remain extremely influential. The founders and subscribers to what became the superb University of Cape Town had a large number of the more intellectual Jews of the Cape Town community. Many of the first Jewish arrivals from England and Germany were highly educated, while the Litvak immigration brought laborers, tradesmen, craftsmen, and would-be businessmen. Originally formed in 1791 by Russia's Empress Catherine II, the Pale of Settlement was a region designated for Jews. For political, economic, and religious reasons, very few Jews were allowed to live elsewhere. The area mostly falls within today's Poland, Russia, Ukraine, Lithuania, Belarus, and Moldova. At the end of the 19th century, close to 95% of the 5.5 million Jews in the Russian Empire lived in the Pale of Settlement. In early 1917, it was abolished, permitting Jews to live where they wished in the former Russian Empire. This region, where higher education had largely been denied to the Jews, continued to be a center of Jewish communal life until World War II. But in South Africa, for the first time, the wealthier Jews could afford to send their children to the universities. The Yeke immigration from Nazi Germany brought numerous academics and graduates to the country, but initially, because of lack of recognition or verification of their degrees by the local authorities, they could not practice as professionals and were forced to accept whatever employment they could find. The early intellectual giants of South Africa were rabbis with university education who became faculty members of the first universities in addition to holding religious office. You may remember some of their names: Reverends Alfred Bender, Joel Rabinowitz, and Chief Rabbi Judah Landau, as well as Chief Rabbis J. Hertz and Louis Rabinowitz. Then, of course, there were the Litvak intellectuals and Yiddish writers, who encouraged both Yiddish literature and journalism to flourish in the early years. When the State of Israel was declared in 1948, Yiddish was all but edged out by the establishment of the Jewish day schools, which favored Hebrew over what they called the ghetto language, and so did the creativity it engendered. But fortunately, it has not died completely, as there is still some academic study of South African Yiddish literature, largely done in conjunction with institutes in America and the United Kingdom. The South African Jewish community also produced some acclaimed figures in the sciences. Lord Solly Zuckerman was a Cape Town-born advisor on scientific affairs to the British government. Nobel Prize winner Sir Aaron Klug was a director of the Laboratory of Molecular Biology at Cambridge and a president of the Royal Society. Philip Tobias headed the Department of Anatomy and Human Biology. He was the Dean of Medicine at Wits University and was thrice nominated for a Nobel Prize, becoming one of the most acclaimed paleoanthropologists across the world. Sidney Brenner, the son of a cobbler in Germiston, taught himself to read from the newspapers that his mother used as table coverings. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2002, and the Wits University Institute for survivors of the atomic blasts Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and working extensively in Africa in such places as Schweizer's Lambarene Hospital. And Percy Amwells is an internationally famed ophthalmologist and inventor who saved Nelson Mandela's eyesight after the latter's release from Robben Island. Then in the field of Jewish prudence, the South African Jewish community has produced a disproportionate number of leading figures. Among them are Maurice Kentridge and his son, Sir Sidney Kentridge, who, together with Izzy Maisels, were key members of the defense team in the treason trial. Arthur Chaskelsen was the first president of the South African Constitutional Court and later its first justice. Albie Sachs, son of trade unionist Solly Sachs, was also a key justice of the Constitutional Court and helped in the design and construction of the court. He also donated an incredible art collection to the court as an aside. The most amazing paintings which are in the Constitutional Court and which come from Albie Sachs. So too was Richard Goldstone, who served on multiple international criminal tribunals and UN fact-finding missions. He was a chancellor of Wits University, a governor of the Hebrew University, and the recipient of a MacArthur Award. In the arts and humanities, the involvement of South African Jewish community is again also hugely disproportionate. Hyman Lieberman, the first Jewish mayor of Cape Town, was responsible for the founding of the Iziko South African National Gallery. Lionel and Florence Phillips, together with Max Michaelis, started the Johannesburg Art Gallery. Michaelis also funded the Chair of Fine Arts at the University of Cape Town, and the Michaelis Art School there is named in his honor. There was internationally acclaimed expressionist painter Irma Stern, the daughter of Yeka immigrants, whose works, as well as those of William Kentridge, son of Sir Sidney Kentridge, command the highest figures for South Africans in the international art sales. And collections of William's work are held in renowned galleries such as the Museum of Modern Art in New York and the Tate Gallery in London. Other renowned South African artists include Wolf Kibble, Lippi Lipschitz, Moses Kotler, and Herman Wald. Jews also dominated theatre in South Africa and the performing arts in general. Izzy Schlesinger, in addition to being a major industrialist and entrepreneur, was the founder of the South African film industry, and his Killarney Film Studios was South Africa's first Hollywood. Yiddish theatre thrived in the early part of the 20th century through the efforts of people such as Sylvia Sidney, and Muriel Alexander was one of the initiators of professional theatre in the country through the Johannesburg Repertory Players. Among major directors were Leontine Sagan, Toby Kushlik, Leonard Schach, and Barney Simon, who was one of the founders of Johannesburg's Market Theatre, which at its highlight was wonderful, and then it kind of just disintegrated because of politics and crime, which of course is terribly sad. Nearly every member of the creative and administrative team behind King Kong, the great and very honored South African musical, was Jewish. Percy Tucker developed CompuTicket and is acknowledged as one of the godfathers of the South African performing arts. Cecilia Sonnenberg and Rene Aronson created the Maynardville Open Air Theatre, famed for its productions of Shakespeare, ballet, and symphony concerts. And of course, South African Jewry boasts its own international actors, Sid James, Moira Lister, Lawrence Harvey, and Sir Anthony Sher. John Cranko and Phyllis Spira excelled in classical ballet, while contemporary dance was dominated by Rhoda Orlin and now her daughter Robin, Sylvia Glaser, and Adele Blank. And in literature, Nadine Gordimer was awarded the Nobel Prize. South African Jews also feature prominently in both classical and popular music. Solly Aronofsky's Jewish Guild Orchestra was a forerunner in the establishment of national symphony orchestras, while in the world of popular music, names such as Manfred Mann, Trevor Rabin, and our much-missed Johnny Clegg have garnered international acclaim. In fact, there are many who say that the South African Jewish community breathed a Jewish neshama or soul into the arts of the country. Today, the South African community, Jewish community, despite its dwindling numbers and aging members, and despite the onslaught of COVID, remains strong and vibrant. It hosts an active Jewish life. There are wonderful Jewish schools, and until March 2020, many large dynamic shuls and an increasing number of smaller, more ultra-Orthodox shuls and schools. Anti-Semitic incidents decreased by 42% between 2018 and 2019. They declined by 10% between 2009 and 2019, in which latter year South Africa experienced only 36 anti-Semitic incidents as against 366 in Australia, 2,041 in Canada, 541 in France, and 1,652 in the UK. We always have been the community or the diaspora community that suffered less anti-Semitism than any other. Of course, there are still individuals and remnants of organizations, both anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. Julius Malema abhors white South Africans and loathes Israel. The late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, when he visited Israel for the first and last time, stood at Yad Vashem and said, quote, that the gas chambers made for a neater death than did apartheid resettlement. And he equated Israelis with Nazis, saying, and I quote, we pray for those who made it, the Holocaust, happen. Help us, the Jews, to forgive them, and help us so that we in turn will not make others suffer. There's been a huge outpouring of grief at his death, and yes, he did great things in South Africa anti-apartheid, but his reputation with the Jews and Zionism is very, very, very vitriolic. There is the Landless People's Movement of South Africa, fortunately more defunct than not, but which blamed the Jews for so much. The Media Review Network, a Johannesburg-based organization dedicated to exposing Zionist apartheid and the occupation of Palestine, and funded in large part by Saudi Arabia. COSATU, the Congress of South African Trade Unions, which regularly and vociferously condemns Israel with impunity and the annexation of Palestinian territories, and is opposed to allowing any Israeli technology into the country, even if it could save lives. And here I'd like to mention the prepex, a non-surgical method of circumcision, which would have and still could save the lives of hundreds of young ethnic Xhosas and Ndebele's, two of South Africa's most numerous communities. Sadly, many young members died during these traditional ceremonies. But we are a remarkable community with a great deal of bounce-back ability. Those of us who live here are committed to continuing to fight for and helping those less fortunate, to standing up for justice and equity, to respecting our traditions and our religion, and to making no apologies for being Jewish, but to carrying our flag and our past proudly and with dignity. Just a brief word on what we at the Union of Jewish Women of South Africa do and do so well. We are the only organization that supplies cooked meals every day of the year to elderly and often infirm and isolated Jewish people reliant on us for their food through kosher mobile meals, which is completely independent of the Chevra Kadisha. The outreach projects we do across the country are amazing. We have supported and still support thousands of indigent and desperate adults and children with a litany of their needs. We are recognized and acknowledged from north to south and east to west, and that gives us the motivation to continue doing what we do with such dedication. We are determined to make life better for as many as we can, and we succeed. As I said, we celebrated 90 years last year. Hopefully, we will celebrate 180 years in 90 years' time. Martin Luther King described the Jewish community of South Africa best. He said, "We shall overcome. We do, and we shall." Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Bev. That was fantastic, very educational, at least for me. We had one question come in that I want to address, and then we'll let you get on with your day. We know you didn't sleep very long. What the main question was where we can see the documentary series. Is there a link? Is there something we should search?
There absolutely is, and I apologize. I should have had the information for you, but I will send it to you later, Kaylee. I will send you the name Mark Wade, who is the producer. I will send you his details, and you can pass them on to everybody, and everyone can get in touch with him. I'm not quite sure what it costs to watch. It's very little in dollars. It's really very little. And you register, and there are eight episodes in the series. And if I tell you that every Sunday night while it was on in South Africa, and of the people who were watching, was sacrosanct. You couldn't do anything on the Sunday nights when it was on. It was absolutely fascinating. And I'm overwhelmed at how talented they were and how brilliantly they did the series, which was watched by Jews and non-Jews alike. And we have a lot of non-Jewish colleagues who are very close to the Jewish community who absolutely loved it. And as a result of which, as I said earlier, they've been asked to do the Lebanese and the Greek communities. So I will send you Mark's details.
Perfect. And actually, we have the photos that you sent. If you want to tell us a little bit about those, I'll pull them up now.
They have, I think they've got their own captions on. Yeah.
We'll still let you have the honors.
Yeah, okay. There we have Alan Swirler in the Eastern Cape. All of these were taken when Alan was filming. Not unfortunately, but because it was a TV series, they didn't do a lot of still photographs. So I managed to pick out the ones that might be most interesting for everyone. So there we have Alan Swirler, and I'm sure some of you must remember him. He is absolutely charming, delightful, and the most fabulous narrator. I mean, I loved listening to him. So there he is in the Eastern Cape. And the Kimberley Museum. Those of you who might have come from Kimberley would remember the old Kimberley Museum, which is now changed. It is no longer as full of Afrikaner as it was, but it is still a very much worthwhile place to visit. Next one is, again, at the Kimberley Mine Museum. And for those of us who remember old mining, that's okay. Old mining, we remember there's the big one. Well, there was not much. This is even more interesting. These are the ostriches in Kimberley. And, I think all of us, or perhaps our mothers, all used feather dusters made from Kimberley ostriches. I was always really concerned about that. And I wondered if they stood next to the ostriches and pulled the feathers out of their tails. And I still don't know how they get those, but they remain a huge part of South Africa's history and South Africa's Jewish community history. Here we have the Grafrenet Shul. There's the crew filming outside the shul. I don't think that anyone uses the shul anymore because there's not a Jewish community in Grafrenet. But again, as a piece of historical evidence, there it is. You can see Alan being filmed. And it just was absolutely fascinating. There he was standing, and he was just so at ease with what he had to say. It was an absolute pleasure to watch him. Inside the Cape Art Gallery, which is really fabulous. I mean, that's really fabulous. And there's Hyman Lieberman, who was the mayor of Cape Town and who started the gallery. A very impressive gentleman indeed, with lots of foresight as far as the growing the Jewish community in South Africa was concerned. An old Smose cart, a regular visitor to country communities. I don't think any of us would actually remember it, no matter how old we are. But that was how the old Smose, the traders, got from one part. This particularly for you, Kaylee. They went from one province to the next, and they used to load their carts with a plethora of goods, anything and everything. And people in the outlying areas, the farmers particularly, would wait with bated breath for them to come so that they could purchase anything from cotton reels to materials to kitchen utensils. It was just incredible. And they were called Smose carts, old traders. Oh, look at that, Noordhoek Beach. For those of you who were there, remember how beautiful it was. You can see the sea in the background. It's positively beautiful. I still don't think that anywhere in the world has beaches and seascapes like the Cape. They really are absolutely mind-blowing and exquisite. And I must just add that Alan had a wonderful time doing this because he went all over the country and he loved every moment of his travels when he was there, and he saw much more than anybody else does. Now in the grounds of the University of the Wits Medical School, the Philip Tobias Health Sciences Building. He was an absolutely charming gentleman, Philip Tobias. He was a bachelor. Interestingly enough, a good friend of mine worked as his secretary towards the end of his tenure there. And when he died, and he was quite wealthy, he he disbanded his everything he had in his flat, and he left her 4 extremely valuable paintings by South African artists. That was his contribution to her after working. She was utterly excited and terribly thrilled about that. Oh, and there over old Johannesburg, he's at the Johannesburg Observatory overlooking Johannesburg. Maybe not the prettiest city in the world, but certainly very vibrant, very vital. And again, for you, Kaylee, it is the largest, excuse me, Johannesburg has the largest man-made forest in the world. Almost all the trees in Johannesburg, and there are many beautiful ones there, were planted by the people who started the city of Johannesburg. So there are areas you can drive through and you are amazed and astounded at our beautiful jacaranda trees, which you find in Pretoria as well. Oh, and there we have Colonel Bill Bergman, chairman of the South African Jewish Ex-Servicemen's League at Johannesburg's Military Museum, which is on the edge of the Johannesburg Zoo. And it's fascinating. It has so much of interest for young children, particularly I remember when my children were little and I took them there and they climbed onto every cannon and did whatever they could and had a wonderful time and then had a history lesson at the same time. So there is still a lot left in Johannesburg. And as I said more than once, South Africa's in my blood. I love it. Those of us who stay here are very proud of it. And we hope that you who have moved from South Africa retain your fond memories and retain the goodness of South Africa, because there was lots in it. And that, Kaylee, is the end of my presentation.
All right.
There you have the banking details.
Another question that came in, it's more of a comment. Sean Edelstein would just like to say kol kavod to you and everything you do, from your cousins, Zelma, Sean, Jean, and Bev.
Oh, thank you very much. And there we have the banking details of the Union of Jewish Women. And, if any one of you is keen to donate, we would be absolutely delighted. I don't need to tell you that currently, currently the South African currency is at an all-time low. So whatever we get, in foreign currency is of enormous benefit to us. And we use it for our beneficiaries all the time. And we would be extremely delighted if we could get any kind of donation from you. I know that I shouldn't say that and it sounds like begging, but really what we do is astonishing. And we have something like perhaps 15 million people here, 15 million children who are often in dire poverty. So whatever we can do to help them as the Jewish people, we do. So thank you for that. Thanks, Kaylee, for putting it up.
Of course, thanks, Bev. I'll keep this up for another couple of moments here. Again, on behalf of SAJAC, me personally, thank you for giving us your time, donating from that, your knowledge, of course, and we hope to see you virtually or maybe one day in real life in the future. So
love to come in real life. I really would.
You never know. Last thing before we let you go, you can stay or you can go, but I did say that there is a raffle for a wonderful piece of artwork that has been donated, and we've been doing that behind the scenes. So the winner of the raffle, and we'll contact you directly afterwards as well, is Dennis. We don't have last names. It's just the names that are listed in Zoom. So Dennis will be reaching out to you. You'll get your artwork, and that is that. So without further ado, we're going to move on to the logistics portion of the AGM. I'm going to pass the torch over to Moira and Pam. And again, Bev, thank you.